Think about this for a moment. Cast your mind back to the 1970s. Picture any British street, a terraced row in Manchester, a council estate in Sheffield, a quiet cul-de-sac somewhere in Surrey. Now picture walking through the front door of almost any one of those homes. What hits you isn't the furniture. It isn't the decor. It isn't the smell of something cooking, although that's there too. What hits you is the cleanliness. Not tidy. Not presentable. Not good enough. Clean. Genuinely, thoroughly, bone-deep clean. Windows that seem almost invisible because the glass is so clear. Skirting boards that have been wiped down. Brass letterboxes that catch the light. Floors you could practically eat off. Now look at today. We have robot hoovers that navigate automatically around the furniture. We have antibacterial sprays for every possible surface. We have dishwashers, steam mops, microfiber cloths that didn't even exist back then. We have apps on our phones to remind us when to clean. We have entire television programs dedicated to home organization. And still, hand on heart, most of us know that our homes don't come close to what those 1970s households looked like on an ordinary Tuesday morning. How? How did they do it? That is exactly what we're getting into today. 20 habits that made 1970s British homes the way they were. 20 habits that have almost entirely vanished from modern life. Because here's the thing nobody tells you. The secret to those immaculate homes wasn't a particular product. It wasn't a magic cleaning solution. It wasn't even time exactly. It was something far more powerful than that. And by the time we reach number 20 on this list, you're going to understand exactly what it was. But let's start at the beginning. Let's start with Monday morning. Monday morning in 1970s Britain had a sound to it. If you grew up in that era, you know exactly what I mean. It was the sound of the twin tub, that rhythmic churning and sloshing that began early, sometimes before breakfast, and carried on through the morning like a kind of domestic percussion section. The Monday wash day tradition in Britain traced its roots back further than most people realize. Originally, the custom existed for a deeply practical reason. In many towns and cities, piped water was only available on certain days of the week. Monday was typically one of those days. And then there was the Sunday roast. Every Sunday, the family sat down to a proper roast dinner, beef, lamb, chicken, pork, whatever the budget allowed. On Monday, the housewife had cold meat left over from the day before and bubble and squeak from the vegetables. There was no need to cook a full meal, which meant her hands and her time were free. Monday was by design the perfect day to wash. By the 1970s, most British homes had electric washing machines, though many still used twin tubs rather than the fully automatic machines we know today. The tradition of Monday wash day persisted, passed down through generations almost like an unspoken law. You simply did. The whole street did. You'd look out the back garden and see lines of laundry going up all along the row. Sheets, shirts, pillowcases, tea towels, the aerial geography of a working neighborhood going through its weekly ritual together. And that word together matters enormously here, because one of the most powerful forces behind the cleanliness of those homes wasn't discipline or willpower at all. It was community synchrony. Everyone did the same tasks on the same days. Get down on your hands and knees. Pick up a block about the size of a bar of soap. Wet it slightly, and then scrub the edge of the front step until it glows white or cream against the stone. If you grew up in the terraced streets of Lancashire, Yorkshire, or anywhere in the industrial north of England, you know exactly what I'm describing, the donkey stone. And if you've never heard of it, let me tell you, this is one of the most remarkable and most forgotten habits in the entire story of British domestic life. The donkey stone was a scouring block made from ground sandstone, cement, bleach powder and water, molded into an oblong shape and dried hard. It came in 3 colors, white, cream, and brown. White for the front step, brown for the backyard. The original brand was made by a Manchester company called Edward Reed and Sons, whose trademark was a donkey, which is where the name stuck. Later, the most well-known manufacturer was a firm called Eli Wally, based at Donkeystone Wharf in Ashton-under-Lyne. Eli Wally's company had been making these stones since the 1890s. They kept making them until 1979. The very year that manufacturing ended, the stones were still being used on steps in Stalybridge and Wigan, and across the mill towns of Greater Manchester. Women on their knees with a bucket of water and a donkey stone, scrubbing the step on a Saturday morning, as their mothers had done before them and their grandmothers before that. Pay attention to this, because there's something here that goes far beyond cleaning. The ritual of the front step was a public declaration. Your step was on display to everyone who walked past. It faced the street. It was the first thing a visitor saw. In the working-class communities of northern England, a clean, well-stoned step was a mark of respectability. A scrubbed step said, "We may not have wealth, we may not have a large house or a fine motor car, but we have pride, we have standards, we are decent people." And the social pressure was real. Your neighbors could see your step. They judged it not cruelly, for the most part, but honestly. The ritual of step cleaning was also, as one historical account from Tameside records, an ideal occasion for gossip between neighbors, as well as a source of rivalry. You scrubbed your step, your neighbor scrubbed hers, and the whole street gleamed. There was a room in almost every British working-class home in the 1970s that most of the family never actually sat in. You walked past it. You might occasionally peer through the door. On very special occasions, Christmas Day perhaps, or if the vicar came to call, or if someone in the family had died, you were allowed inside. The rest of the year it sat in a state of perfect, barely touched preservation. This was the front room, or as it was known in many households, the best room. The front room was a cultural institution unique to British domestic life. It contained the best furniture, the sofa nobody sat on, the sideboard polished to a mirror shine, the ornaments arranged with care on the mantelpiece, the framed photographs of family members going back 2 generations. The carpet in the front room was frequently covered with a protective runner or felt padding to prevent wear. The fire in the front room, if there was one, was lit perhaps 4 or 5 times a year. The curtains in the front room were drawn to protect the furniture from sunlight fading. The front room was the household's public face, its statement to the world. In the same way the front step declared your standards to the street, the front room declared them to anyone who was ever admitted inside the house. It was aspirational space. In the words of researchers who have studied this phenomenon, the front room bestowed dignity and respectability. For many families, working class, immigrant and otherwise, maintaining a perfect front room was an act of social identity. It said, "We belong, we are respectable, we have something worth showing." Nobody has a front room like that anymore. The best furniture is used daily. The good china, if anyone still has a separate set, lives permanently in the back of a cupboard and is brought out approximately never. Look at the windows of a British street in the 1970s. Every single one of them has net curtains. Not just for privacy, although that mattered too. Net curtains were a social signal as coded and precise as anything you'd find in a diplomat's protocol manual. And the condition of those net curtains told the whole story. White, bright, freshly washed net curtains meant you were a person of standards. Grey, sagging, yellowed nets were a public announcement of failure, of letting things slip, of not caring anymore. And on a British street in that era, not caring was a condition your neighbors noticed and remembered. This is the 5th habit, the relentless maintenance of the public face of the home. And it extended far beyond the nets. It included the front doorstep, the brass on the front door, the garden path, the paintwork on the window frames. All of it tended, all of it presented, because all of it was seen. Now let's go to the front door itself, because the brass on a 1970s British front door deserves its own moment of recognition. Door knockers, letterboxes, handles. In many homes, the fireplace fittings inside the hallway as well. All of it polished, weekly, in many households, with brasso. Let's talk about the single most important annual event in the British housekeeping calendar, spring cleaning. We tend to think of spring cleaning as a nice metaphor now. A fresh start, decluttering, maybe sorting through the wardrobe and donating things to charity. We use the phrase almost poetically. But in the 1970s and for generations before, spring cleaning was not a metaphor. It was structural maintenance. It was absolutely necessary. And the reason it was necessary was coal. In 1964, only 13% of British homes had central heating. By the early 1970s, that figure was rising, but the transition was far from complete. Across the country, millions of homes still relied on coal fires for warmth throughout autumn and winter. Coal fires were the epicenter of the home, particularly in the industrial towns of the Midlands and the North. They heated the room, they were the gathering point of the family, and they left behind, over the course of a long British winter, a fine, pervasive layer of soot on every surface in the house, on walls, on curtains, on furniture, inside lampshades, in the fibers of carpets. Coal soot didn't announce itself with a dramatic visible coating. It crept. It settled. It slowly grayed everything it touched. And from autumn through to early spring, with windows kept shut against the cold and fires burning daily, there was very little you could do about it. You managed it. But you couldn't fully beat it until the weather changed. And then April came. Or sometimes late March if the weather was kind. The windows were thrown open, and the spring clean began. Curtains came down and were washed. Walls were wiped or scrubbed. Rugs and carpets were dragged outside. Mattresses were turned and aired in the garden. Every piece of furniture was moved, and the floors cleaned underneath. The fireplace itself was cleaned back to bare brick. The whole house was stripped, cleaned and remade. It took days. In larger families, it took the better part of a week. This was not spring cleaning as a lifestyle choice. This was spring cleaning as a physical necessity, the annual removal of a winter's worth of coal soot from every surface in the home. And when central heating finally arrived in those homes, and the coal fires went out for the last time, something else went with them. Not just the soot, but the discipline of the annual deep clean. The reason for it, the necessity that had driven it for over 100 years. But there's another habit from this era that almost nobody talks about anymore. One that happened not once a year, but every single morning, without exception. Every morning. Before anything else. Before the kettle was on. Before the children came downstairs. Before the first cup of tea. The bedroom windows were opened and the bed covers were thrown back. Not remade. Thrown back. Left open to the air. This was habit number 11, and it was so deeply embedded in British domestic practice of the 1970s that it barely registered as a choice. It simply was what you did. You got up, you opened the window, even in October, even in January for a few minutes, and you left the bed to breathe. The thinking behind it was rooted in a long tradition of British domestic medicine, that a damp enclosed bed was a breeding ground for illness, that airing the mattress every morning was as fundamental to health as washing your hands. But this habit didn't exist in isolation. It was part of a morning routine that would leave most people today genuinely breathless, because in those households, the morning was when the real work began. And in homes that still had a coal fire, which, across the industrial regions of Britain, meant millions of homes well into the 1970s, the morning began with the grate. Every morning the fire had to be tended. The ash from the previous night's fire was raked out carefully into a metal bucket. The grate was cleaned. New paper was laid, then kindling, then coal. The fire was relaid and lit. This was not a romantic pastoral ritual. This was cold, gritty, ashy work done before the house was warm, often in the dark, by a woman who had already been up for 20 minutes opening windows and would soon have children to get ready for school. And then, once the fire was attended to and the beds were airing, came the daily circuit of the house. In 1976, a housekeeping book called Understanding Homemaking, written by Margaret Picton and published by Blackie, laid out what this looked like in practice. The routine was described as an example of a day in the life of Mrs. Brown, who has 2 young school children. Hall, landing and stairs. Tidied, vacuumed if necessary, all wooden surfaces dusted. Bedrooms. Window opened. Vacuum if necessary. All clothes tidied away, windowsill dusted, furniture and ornaments dusted, bathroom and lavatory. And this is the detail that stops people in their tracks when they read it today. Cleaned, with disinfectant sprinkled down the wash basin, the bath and the lavatory, every single day. Pay attention to this. Every day. Not when it looked dirty. Every day. The lavatory was brushed and flushed. The basin was wiped. The taps were polished. Disinfectant went down every drain. Daily. It wasn't considered exceptional. It was considered the minimum. And if you think that sounds exhausting, you're only halfway through the morning routine. Because then came the kitchen. The kitchen in a 1970s British home was cleaned after every single meal. Not a quick wipe of the hob. Not a stack of dishes left in the sink to deal with later. After every meal, breakfast, dinner, tea, the surfaces were wiped. The washing up was done, the draining board was dried, and the floor was swept. The kitchen was left clean. Then, and only then, was the meal considered finished. This sounds almost impossible by the standards of modern life. But here is the thing that most people miss about it. It was faster than the alternative. A kitchen cleaned consistently, after every use, never reached the state where it required a serious, time-consuming deep clean. The dishes never piled up. The grease never had time to bake on. The crumbs never had 3 days to work their way into the corners. The daily discipline meant the kitchen was always manageable. It was the absence of that discipline, the I'll do it later approach, that creates the mountainous cleaning session that modern life seems to demand every few weeks. The same principle applied to the oven. There was no self-cleaning function. There was no clever chemical foam that you sprayed and left overnight. There was soda crystals, a cloth, a bowl of hot water, and effort. Ovens were cleaned regularly, not as a quarterly panic, but as part of the routine of the kitchen. Burnt-on grease was dealt with before it became carbonized archaeological evidence of meals past. The most powerful cleaning habit of the 1970s wasn't a product. It wasn't a technique. It wasn't a schedule, or a routine, or a specific task. It was the street. In the 1970s, you lived in a community that shared your standards. Your neighbors cleaned on the same days. They polished their brass, scrubbed their steps, washed their nets, aired their beds, beat their rugs, and maintained their homes to a broadly similar standard, because that standard was communal, visible, enforced not by law or regulation but by something far more powerful, shared identity and social expectation. Your front step was seen by everyone who walked past. Your windows faced the street. Your nets were visible from 20 houses away. And on the other side of the garden fence, a woman who had grown up with the same habits, in the same tradition, was doing the same things on the same days. You weren't cleaning for yourself alone. You were cleaning as a member of a community that cared about how it presented itself. Collectively. Together. This is habit number 20, and it is the one that explains everything else. The Monday wash day wasn't just tradition. It was what everyone on the street was doing on Monday morning, and you could see the evidence of it on every washing line. The polished brass wasn't vanity. It was the expected standard that your neighbors held, and that you held yourself to. The front room kept perfect for visitors wasn't eccentric. It was the understood norm of how a home was maintained and what it communicated to those who entered it. When that communal world dissolved, when neighborhoods became more anonymous, when people moved more frequently, when the connection between your home and your immediate community weakened, the social engine of British cleanliness went quiet. And without that engine, the individual habits followed, one by one, over the following decades. The Monday wash day became whenever the machine needs running. The polished brass became a door handle nobody notices. The front step became a piece of concrete that nobody thinks about. The front room was knocked through and opened up into a kitchen diner. We gained privacy. We gained independence. We gained labor-saving devices that genuinely do save labor. And we lost, quietly, the extraordinary discipline of a community that kept itself clean because cleaning was how it told the world who it was. Here is the unsettling truth at the heart of all 20 of these habits. The 1970s British home wasn't spotless because people had more time. Research from the period shows women were spending up to 70 hours a week on domestic work, more than most full-time jobs today. Those homes were spotless because the people who maintained them understood, in a way that has become genuinely rare, that the home was a statement, a declaration of character, a form of dignity that didn't cost money, but demanded daily commitment. That the way you kept your home said something real and public about who you were. You don't have to bring back the donkey stone. You don't have to reinstate the Monday wash day. But there's something in this story that's worth keeping. The idea that a clean home isn't a chore to be delayed. It's a standard to be maintained. Quietly, daily, proudly. Not because anyone is watching, though once they were, but because the people who lived in those 1970s homes understood something we've largely forgotten. You are the kind of person who keeps a clean house. Or you're not. And that choice is made not in the big dramatic spring clean once a year, but in 1,000 small decisions every single day. Which of these 20 habits surprised you the most? Which one do you remember from your own childhood? Your mum's kitchen, your nan's front room, the smell of Brasso on a Saturday morning? Tell me in the comments below. I genuinely want to know. And if this brought back something real for you today, if it made you feel something you haven't felt in a while, hit the like button. Share it with someone who'll understand it, and make sure you're subscribed so you never miss what comes next. Because there is so much more of this to uncover, and every single story is worth telling. This was British Nostalgia. We keep the table set.